I had always been taught that the human species was primitive, their culture less refined than that of the advanced civilizations scattered throughout the galaxy. As an officer of the Garthian Collective, I was tasked with assessing and evaluating human behavior during our diplomatic exchanges. Most species respected our technological superiority, but humans were different. They had a natural resilience, an inexplicable drive, and a sense of humor that made them interesting. Yet, despite all that, there was one thing I never understood: their food. On a routine visit to Earth, I was assigned to observe and engage with the humans at a cultural exchange event. I had witnessed their technological marvels, their military prowess, and their vast resourcefulness. But food? The very idea of consuming what they called food seemed like an absurd waste of time. It didn't make sense to me, a being from a species that thrived on synthesized energy, that humans would engage in such a primitive, labor-intensive act. It was at the Earth Embassy where I first encountered it. There, in the dining hall, human food was being served. Strange smells filled the air, some sweet, some sour, others spicy. The texture of their meals was beyond my understanding: soft, crunchy, chewy, all in the same bite. The smell alone was enough to make me recoil. Yet, when the humans around me devoured the food with such enthusiasm, I felt an undeniable curiosity. "Come on, give it a try," said Lieutenant Parker, one of the human officers assigned to our diplomatic mission. His grin was contagious, and despite myself, I found my skepticism waning. "I'm perfectly fine with my nutrient rations," I responded, attempting to mask my curiosity with diplomatic detachment. "Oh, come on," Parker urged. "You can't say you've experienced Earth until you've tried human food. It's an integral part of our culture. The taste, the texture, the whole sensory experience, it's like nothing you've ever encountered." He slid a plate in front of me, filled with what appeared to be a form of bread covered in melted cheese, tomato sauce, and various herbs. I blinked. I had heard of pizza, but never had I thought to actually try it. "It's called pizza," Parker explained, sensing my hesitation. "Don't worry. You won't regret it." I hesitated for a moment, then picked up a piece, my fingers lightly gripping the warm slice. As I brought it to my mouth, I prepared for disappointment, assuming the human concept of food would match my expectations, a primitive, non-nutritional waste of time. But when I took that first bite, everything changed. The warmth of the dough, the tanginess of the tomato, the creamy richness of the cheese, it was like nothing I had ever tasted. The combination of flavors hit me in waves, overwhelming my senses in a way that no synthesized energy ever could. The textures, too, were fascinating. I could feel the crunch of the crust followed by the smoothness of the melted cheese, a balance of opposites that made my mind reel. I stared at the plate in shock, a part of me wondering how something so simple could be so complex. "This is delicious," I admitted, almost to myself. Parker's grin widened. "I knew you'd like it," he said with a laugh. "That's the beauty of human food, it's full of surprises." In that moment, I realized that my understanding of human culture had been incomplete. There was so much more to it than I had initially thought. The way humans cherished food, how they gathered together to share it, how they savored each bite. This wasn't just sustenance. It was an experience. It was life. And in my mind, something shifted. As I finished the last bite, I could feel the satisfaction of the meal settling in my chest. I felt a strange warmth, something I had never experienced in my nutrient cycles. The connection to the humans deepened. Perhaps they were more than just a primitive species. Maybe, I mused, it wasn't their technological advancements that set them apart, but their ability to find meaning in the simplest of things. The humans didn't just survive, they lived, fully, passionately. And their food was a testament to that. "Would you like to try something else?" Parker asked. I didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." "What's next?" As the evening continued, I discovered more dishes, each more complex and satisfying than the last. Spicy curries, rich stews, tangy fruits, and savory pastries. Every dish opened a new door to understanding humanity. I felt like I was unlocking a secret to their culture, a key to a deeper connection than I had ever anticipated. By the end of the night, I was no longer the skeptical officer who had dismissed human food as primitive. I was a convert, captivated by the strange, intoxicating allure of human cuisine. What had started as a challenge to my perceptions had turned into an obsession. I could no longer imagine a world where I didn't experience the joy of human food. It was then I understood. In their food, humans didn't just nourish their bodies, they nourished their souls. And now, so was I. In the days following that first taste of human food, I found myself increasingly obsessed. It wasn't just the flavors or the textures that intrigued me, it was the connection that came with each meal. The idea that humans gathered around food, shared it, and celebrated it, was something I had never fully understood. But now, after that initial experience, it was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. Each day at the Earth Embassy, I couldn't help but gravitate toward the dining hall. At first, I convinced myself it was merely curiosity. A diplomatic officer should understand the intricacies of every culture, after all. But as the days passed, I found that my desire to taste more was far from academic. I was drawn to the rituals of food, the communal aspect that humans held so dear. I had begun with pizza, but soon I was sampling everything. Pasta, spicy tacos, delicate pastries, each new dish was like a revelation. I became bolder, asking humans to teach me how to prepare their meals. Lieutenant Parker was more than willing to share his knowledge, and I found myself spending hours in the kitchen, eagerly watching and learning as he taught me to craft dishes like spaghetti, stir-fries, and even simple sandwiches. I could see the pride in his eyes when I successfully prepared a dish. "Not bad for a first-timer," he would say, his voice filled with encouragement. But it was more than just learning to cook. There was something about food that bridged the gap between cultures in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was in the small moments, the way humans would laugh together as they shared stories over dinner, or the way their eyes would light up with delight when they tasted something new. They didn't just consume food, they savored it. And it wasn't about necessity, it was about experience, connection, and joy. Soon, my obsession with human food began to take over every aspect of my life. I found myself thinking about meals at odd hours, planning my next culinary adventure. I began taking notes, recipes, ingredients, flavors, and textures. The more I ate, the more I understood. This wasn't just about sustenance. It was a language in its own right, a way for humans to express their creativity, their culture, and even their emotions. But, as with all obsessions, there were consequences. I started spending less time on my diplomatic duties. My reports on human culture became half-hearted, and I found myself skipping important meetings to attend meals or experiment with new recipes. Parker, ever the supportive friend, noticed my growing preoccupation and tried to encourage me to get back on track. "You're a little too caught up in this, aren't you?" Parker asked one afternoon, as I carefully measured the ingredients for a batch of cookies. "I thought you were here to observe human culture, not to become a chef." "I am observing," I replied, but my tone lacked conviction. "This is part of their culture. You can't truly understand a species without understanding their food." Parker raised an eyebrow but didn't argue further. He seemed to recognize that my fixation had gone beyond simple curiosity. "I get it," he said with a grin. "But don't forget to take a break. The rest of Earth has more to offer than just our meals." I nodded absently, already lost in the process of stirring the dough. But deep down, I knew that he was right. My obsession had begun to overshadow the real purpose of my mission. I had come to Earth to learn about the species, their technology, and their way of life, but instead, I had found myself immersed in something as mundane as food. I had overlooked the grander picture. The realization hit me harder than I expected. I had become so consumed by food that I had stopped looking at the world around me. Humans didn't just cook and eat because they had to. They did it because it was part of their emotional expression, a means of forging connections, and a way to celebrate life. But the richness of their culture didn't lie solely in their meals. It was the relationships, the shared experiences, and the way they lived with purpose and joy. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something crucial. It wasn't just the food itself that had captured my attention, but the essence of human life that it represented. The shared moments, the laughter, the struggle to perfect a dish, and the satisfaction of sitting down at the table together. It was the whole experience that mattered. As I stared at the dough, feeling both the weight of my responsibility and the lingering taste of a life-altering obsession, I had to admit that maybe my fixation on human food wasn't so misplaced after all. It had led me to understand something far deeper than just their cuisine. It had shown me the way humans connected with one another, their love for the simple yet profound pleasures of life. But now, the challenge was to strike a balance between my fascination with human food and my role as an observer. I had to remember why I was here. There was more to Earth than just the food. There was a whole culture, a people who had built themselves up from the ground, faced adversity, and found joy in the smallest of moments. They had adapted, survived, and thrived, and it was those qualities that I needed to understand, not just the contents of their kitchens. "I'll be back on track tomorrow," I whispered to myself, as the smell of freshly baked cookies filled the air. But for now, one more bite wouldn't hurt. The Aegis horizon was docked at the Earth Embassy, and the tension in the air had never been thicker. In the days that followed my increasing obsession with human food, I had struggled to balance my duty with my newfound fixation. My reports on human culture had become lackluster, and the once steady stream of diplomatic communications I had sent back to the Garthian Collective had slowed to a trickle. I had spent so much time learning recipes and sharing meals with humans that I had lost sight of why I was really there. The realization had come too late. "Captain Pyron isn't happy with your lack of focus," Lieutenant Parker said one morning, offering me a steaming cup of human coffee, his expression cautious but amused. "He wants results. Not a list of dishes you like." I looked down at the cup in my hands, the rich, aromatic steam curling upwards, teasing my senses. The truth was, I was ashamed. I had come here to gather data, to understand humanity on a deeper level. Instead, I had fallen into a routine of taste and sensation. But somehow, the human obsession with food had revealed a side of their culture that no data set could capture, their ability to take pleasure in the small, everyday acts. Their lives, for all their chaos, were lived with intention, and food was the key to understanding that. Yet I knew I couldn't afford to ignore the bigger picture any longer. "We need to refocus," I muttered, taking a sip from the cup Parker had handed me. "This mission is about understanding more than just the food." Parker studied me for a moment, his brow furrowed. "Then why don't you start showing it? If you want to truly understand humans, it's more than just sampling dishes. Get out there, observe, learn. I think you're ready to see the whole picture now." His words were a wake-up call, and the weight of my actions settled heavily on my shoulders. I had been so wrapped up in the sensory aspects of human life that I had failed to see the deeper purpose behind it all. I couldn't continue on this path of indulgence. There was more to humanity than meals, more than the comfort of their food. Their resilience, their creativity, their way of approaching life, it was all woven into their culture, and I had to begin seeing it in the bigger context. The days that followed were different. I still visited the dining hall, but now I paid more attention to the context of the meals. I noticed how humans came together to share a meal, how the act of eating wasn't just for nourishment, it was a social event, an opportunity to bond, to discuss, to reflect. I saw the way they used food to celebrate life's milestones, to offer comfort, to express love. It was more than just nutrition, it was an expression of humanity's very essence. I began joining Lieutenant Parker and his team for meals, not to indulge in the food itself, but to observe the humans as they interacted. At first, it was uncomfortable. I had spent so long as an outsider, analyzing everything from a distance. But as the days passed, I found myself drawn into conversations, laughing at their jokes, understanding the stories behind their food. I started recognizing the intricacies of their relationships, the way they comforted each other when troubled, the way they shared their hopes and dreams over dinner. Food was their medium of connection. I was finally beginning to grasp the depth of it. Then, one evening, things took a surprising turn. The embassy was hosting a gala to celebrate the arrival of several high-ranking diplomats, and food was, naturally, a major part of the event. I found myself in the thick of it, surrounded by human leaders, Garthian delegates, and various representatives of other species, all sampling the finest of Earth's cuisine. There were small, delicate appetizers, robust main courses, and desserts that practically glowed with sweetness. I could see the pride in the humans' faces as they watched others experience their food. "Try this," Parker said, handing me a small dish of chocolate mousse. "It's a human favorite. You might find it memorable." The mousse was smooth and decadent, unlike anything I had ever tasted. The richness of the chocolate melted on my tongue, a sensation that sent an unexpected shiver through me. I glanced up at Parker, surprised. "You're right," I said, unable to hide the smile forming on my face. "This is remarkable." But as I looked around the room, something caught my eye. Humans were laughing, discussing their various dishes, and exchanging stories. They weren't just enjoying the food, they were celebrating their culture. They were using the food to unite, to create shared experiences, to connect with one another. I saw for the first time how food wasn't just a necessary function for humans. It was their art, their language, their connection to each other. It was their lifeblood in a way I hadn't understood before. I stepped back from the gathering, my mind racing. This moment was a turning point. The food had been the gateway, yes, but the deeper truth was far more profound. Humans used food as a means of building relationships. It wasn't just about filling the stomach. It was about nurturing the spirit, about creating a sense of belonging and identity. In every bite, they wove together their shared experiences and history. I had to admit it, the more I learned about human food, the more I understood about humanity itself. They didn't need the most advanced technology to thrive, nor did they require the same sophisticated rituals of the more evolved species. They thrived on simple pleasures, the bonds they formed, and the way they elevated the smallest of experiences into something meaningful. I wasn't just obsessed with food anymore. I was obsessed with understanding why food was so deeply woven into their very existence. Why did it matter so much? Why was it the vehicle for so many emotions? The answers were there, hidden in plain sight. I just had to keep looking deeper. The food was only the beginning. The gala was still in full swing, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop reflecting on what I had just learned. Human food wasn't just sustenance. It was a vessel of meaning, a way to express their humanity. The more I observed, the more I realized how deeply interconnected food was with their sense of community, tradition, and survival. This simple, seemingly mundane act was much more than an evolutionary necessity. It was the core of who they were. As the evening wore on, I found myself back at the dinner table with Parker. He was talking animatedly about the political intricacies of a recent treaty, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I was lost in thought, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few weeks. Parker noticed my distant gaze and raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking about something else, aren't you?" I snapped out of my reverie and smiled. "Yeah, I guess I am. I've been so focused on the wrong thing. This food, it's more than I ever imagined. I thought it was just a way for humans to fill their stomachs, but it's something far deeper. It's the way you connect with each other, express your emotions, and even your survival. It's the heartbeat of your culture." Parker smiled knowingly. "I told you. Food's never just about food for humans. It's the foundation of so many things. It's where we share our lives, our struggles, our joys, and even our losses. Every meal is a piece of who we are." The weight of his words settled into me. My previous obsession with just tasting the food had shifted into a deep understanding of the human experience. The more I ate, the more I connected. I hadn't just been observing the humans, I had been unknowingly joining them. It wasn't just their meals that were important. It was the connections they made through those meals, the stories shared, and the bonds formed over every bite. In that moment, I knew I had changed. My perspective on humanity had shifted. I was no longer just an outsider, an observer. I had tasted their culture, understood their connections, and felt the depth of their spirit. I realized that my mission wasn't just to gather information. It was to connect with them, to understand what truly made them tick. Later that night, I stood in front of the embassy's large bay window, gazing out at the earth below. The stars were bright in the distance, and the planet's soft blue glow illuminated the dark sky. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. I understood now that humanity's strength wasn't just in their technology or their military. It was in their ability to adapt, to connect, and to celebrate the simplest pleasures of life. I turned to look at Parker, who had followed me to the window. "I think I've learned something important." "You mean about food?" he asked, his voice teasing. "Not just food," I replied, smiling. "About everything. About what it means to be human. You don't need to be the most advanced species to thrive. It's the way you live, the way you love, the way you connect, and yes, the way you eat that defines you." "I'm beginning to see it now." Parker nodded thoughtfully. "Told you it wasn't just about the food." And just like that, the final pieces clicked into place. I had spent so much time focusing on the wrong things, on trying to analyze and dissect. But the true meaning of humanity wasn't in their technology, their history, or their wars. It was in the way they gathered around a table, shared a meal, and celebrated the small victories of everyday life. Their strength, their ability to overcome, and their endless creativity were all wrapped up in how they shared food and their stories. As the night grew quieter, I sat back, content, knowing that my understanding of humanity had deepened. I had started this journey as an outsider, skeptical and detached, but now, I felt a sense of connection that went beyond the superficial. I wasn't just an observer anymore, I was part of something bigger. The food had been the key, but it had opened up an entire world to me. And as I took one last look at the Earth's glowing surface, I realized something else. I wasn't done yet. There was still so much more to learn, to experience, and to share. Because in the end, humanity wasn't just defined by what they ate, they were defined by how they lived, loved, and connected. And I, too, was now a part of that.